It's great to be here and in your wonderful city. I had a interesting kind of route that I took in. So I ended up flying, my flights got canceled yesterday, so I ended up flying into Nashville. So I got to drive through and make the drive up, and it was great. It was really, it was beautiful. It was phenomenal to kind of like come in. So, and then coming into your city, like you guys get all excited, and I don't know what you think of when you think of Colorado and the mountains, but we don't have rivers like this. So for me to like come across the bridge was really special, and I can see why a lot of you are here, and I've met a few of the pastors here. I know why you have been here for a long time. So God's up to something here. Ross and what he's doing with the city movement here, I think, is crucial. And I now have a role similar to his in that I am kind of a neutral convener. But that's not what I started off doing. I was a pastor for 10 years in a suburb of a suburb of Denver called Arvada. And I worked at two great churches. I loved my time. How many of you, is everyone in here on a church staff or like in kind of lay ministry? Is that right? Everyone in this room? Just kind of nod, make me feel, all right, that's true, okay. So one guy in the back, the blue sports coat, I don't think he is, but everybody else in this room. So I did what you did. And I worked on two great church staffs. I loved my time working at both of those churches. But I was struggling on a number of different levels. And one of the things that was really hard for me is I couldn't find like enough interesting things to talk about to be able to sit up in front of people every single week and to talk for 30 minutes. And so then I had to like just start making up stuff or like copying what other people were saying. And that really started to wear me out after a while. So I finally had to come to the realization that I wasn't wired to be an every week communicator. And it took me a while to get there. And so there was an element there that I was wrestling through. And then I started to spend time with Eric Swanson. And Eric was writing about the externally focused church at that period of time. And the churches that I worked at were part of the church growth movement. And they did some great things especially through the mid-90s, late 90s, early 2000s. We were basically helping people understand that church doesn't have to be boring. And that was like a real light bulb moment for a lot of people, and that worked, and our churches grew. And then we kept doing those same things, and they stopped working as well. I don't know if any of you have had this experience in your church, but if you tell people that like church can be relevant, after a while, relevant becomes the norm. Then you have to like figure out something new to say. And so that's what was going on. And what Eric and his friend Rick Russo did is they came along and said, hey, like something's missing with the church, that we should be engaged more locally than we are. And we've swung the pendulum over here to thinking about what happens for that hour and 15 minutes or what happens globally, and we've forgotten about our own communities that we exist in. And so as Eric was writing, I began to reach out to him and spend a lot of time with him, and I started to see some great things happen in our church as far as becoming more engaged locally. But I remember we were doing an oil change for single moms on a Saturday, and I think like 16 different single moms came through, and we had these people from our church that were serving. And it was a great day. There was like a lot to be happy about. But I remember like leaving that experience and driving home and thinking to myself like, that was great, but that's not going to change our city. And I just started to get obsessed with John 17 and with this prayer, Jesus' prayer for unity. And not just the fact that he prays for unity, but he says that when there's unity, that people that don't know God, they will see the unity among those who follow Jesus. They'll see that unity, and in some beautiful, mystical, sacred way, that they'll be drawn closer to God. And as I started to think about that text and about that passage, I just started to ask myself this question, like, what if that's actually true? What if Jesus' last recorded prayer as a free man is actually true? And it was one of those things, I started going to bed at night thinking about unity. I started waking up in the morning thinking about unity. And I'm still carrying on my role as a pastor at the church that I was at, but I start to meet with other pastors in our city. And we start to, and Eric at the same time, I'm just kind of like, I just follow Eric around. So like, if you've been around here in these rooms, you've been exposed to Eric. This is what I do. Like whatever Eric's doing, I just like copy that, and then, but then I actually do it in a city. And then... And then I just follow him to the next spot. So Eric started to write about unity and about to transform the city, and I was just in. And in my little part of Denver, it's very similar. It's about 118,000 people. My little part of Denver, we started to gather faith leaders, and we started to get really excited about serving together in the community and making a difference locally, and what we would call demonstrating the gospel, making the gospel tangible. And then we had a bad moment. We realized that as pastors, we didn't know our city well enough to know what we should actually be doing. Like, we all got excited about stacking hands and coming together and working together in the community, and then we realized, well, like, we don't know what the smartest thing to do is. Like, if we were all going to leverage the sleeping giant of volunteerism that's sitting in our churches, what should we actually do? And because we didn't know that, we started to reach out to local government leaders with hopes that we could exegete our city the same way that we exegete the text. And so we started to have these gatherings. We'd meet in a room like really similar to this. There wouldn't be quite this many people. We were really focused on bringing together some of these lead pastors from the congregations in our community. So we would meet with the city manager, the police chief, and about 6.5 years ago, I'm sitting in a room like this with 22 pastors and our mayor. And our mayor brought his wife that day. And to get a mayor to come to a room like that, if they're not, like really engaged in the faith community, you got to tell them what you're going to do. So that they know like the level of weirdness that's going to happen in the room. And so we had told them, we're like, we're only going to ask you 2 questions. We're going to ask you, what's your dream for our city? And we're going to ask you, if you could wave a magic wand and change something, what would you change? And those 2 questions were stolen from a guy named Ray Bakke. And we would always ask that second question, and then we would get out our little pen and paper, and we're like, all right, that second question was like, we're going to set them up for like to figure out what it is that we should do together in Arvada. And so we ask him that second question, and he pulls out this little piece of paper, and he had written down all of his answers, and he starts to read down this list. And he said, all right, I want to live if I could wave a magic wand, I want to live in a city where there's no financial debt. I want to live in a city where there's no single moms that live below the poverty line. There's no at-risk kids. And I mean, he just goes all the way, and most of them were really good. So there was some weird stuff on there too. He was like, we need a better newspaper. we're all like, we can't help you with that. But he gets done, and we're just feverishly taking notes. He gets done, and he folds this piece of paper up, and he puts it in his back pocket. And very much in passing, very innocently, he says, if you guys wanted to have the biggest impact, you'd figure out a way to start some kind of a neighboring movement with all those people that show up to your churches. And then he just like moved on. He's going to go on to something else, and we're like, whoa, go back to that. And he just said, yeah, what we're learning at the city level is that the closer people are in relationship based on proximity, the less weight there is on all the systems that we're trying to create and uphold for people in need. He said, we can go and start another program for elderly shut-ins because that's an issue that's on the rise in our community. Or that person who's growing older and becoming more and more isolated could live on a block where the people around them know them and are actually caring for them and connected to them. Because we can start another Boys and Girls Club for that kid who's missing a father figure in their life, or that kid could live on a block where other healthy people and adults are bringing them into the life and the fabric of their family. And then he said this amazing line. He said, what we're learning at the city is that relationships always trump programs. And when he said that, it was just like that. It's like he just like let off a little grenade in the room. He was like, relationships always trump programs. And then he said this line that's in our book that said, what we're learning is that if we could just become a community of great neighbors, that most of the issues that we're facing, he said all of the issues that we're facing in our city would be either reduced or eliminated. And I want you to just imagine, this won't be hard for us to imagine in this room, okay? It's like imagine like you make your living helping people orient their lives around like the teachings of Jesus. Imagine that's your job. Now imagine what it feels like when God uses your mayor to tell you that the smartest thing that you can do for your city is the thing that Jesus said to do. Like, that love your neighbor thing? Like God used our mayor to say, hey, you know what? I got a great idea. And he literally wasn't trying to be mean. He had no idea how humiliating it was for him to say this. Okay? I got a great idea. That love your neighbor thing, you guys should do that with all your people. It would actually be the thing that turned our city upside down. I'll never forget I'm driving home out of that meeting that day. I'm going back into my little suburban loop that I live in. And I'm a full-time pastor. I was sitting on the boards of 3 different nonprofits at that time. I was involved in a lot of different things. And there's about 100 thoughts running through my head as I'm driving back into my cul-de-sac. The 2 that I remember are this. The first one was, Jesus is smart. Like, you'd think as a pastor I would know that. But there's something about that moment that like, Jesus is really smart. It just landed on me. Is it possible that when he gets asked to boil the entire text down to one thing, is it possible that what he gives us is a very simple strategic plan that if every believer did it, it would actually change the world overnight? So that was my first thought. And my second thought is that I realized I wasn't doing it. Like, in my own life, I wasn't putting a lot of intentionality into relationships with my actual neighbors. I was putting almost zero intentionality into my relationships with my actual neighbors. Because I was doing a lot of other good stuff. And to be honest, like, I would come home, my role as a pastor, like, I'd come home and I'm just like grinding, and it felt like, I don't know what your life is like, but as a pastor, like, I never felt like I got it all done that day. I never felt like, yeah, that was a great day, got everything checked off, right? There's always something else. There's always one more thing on the to-do list. And so then I would come home, and a lot of times I wasn't living very well. I wasn't living at a healthy pace, and I would come home and I just feel like I'm behind. Like, I know I should be more dialed in with Lauren and in our marriage. I know that I should be more present and having better boundaries with my kids. And so I would come back into my cul-de-sac, and my thought was, okay, I just try to put your phone down for like 10 minutes. Like, just try to be a little bit more engaged. And like, almost every bit of my energy that I had was internal. It was thinking about like what happened after that garage door got down. And so it left almost nothing for my actual neighborhood. Now, I should say this. I got into ministry because like I'm a raging evangelist. Not like in a weird way. Like in a normal, like, I like to talk to people about Jesus and about their spiritual lives and have spiritual conversations. That's why I got into ministry. I love when people, like, their life collides with the life of Jesus and everything gets all messed up for them. That's why I got into ministry. But 10 years in, I had drifted into a place where almost everyone I hung out with thought about the world the same way that I did. And it was killing me. It was like I was running out of steam because of that. This thing that like really fueled me was starting to die because I was on a church staff and I was busy doing lots of church things. And part of what happened, if I'm honest with you, with our mayor pointing us towards neighboring, was that it gave me an excuse to reorient some things in my own life and to set some things back in place. So I went in that day and I told my wife, Lauren. Lauren's been ahead of me on most things in life, but also in neighboring. And so I told her what had happened, and she just looked at me and said, "What are you going to do about it?" And I just said, "I don't know." I didn't want to trap myself into anything, so I said, let's do like a 1-year experiment, but let's just do some small things. Okay, let's just kind of like do some little experimenting out there in the front yard, and we'll just see what happens. We'll see if any doors open up. And that 1-year experiment was almost 7 years ago. It's still going, and it's totally screwed up my whole life. And I don't want to go back. Like, I'm starting to actually believe that the way that Jesus talks about living, if we'll quit trying to figure out loopholes and ways to get around it, the way that Jesus talks about living, it actually is the best way to live. And it has completely given me new life and new purpose around talking to people and being around people who don't think about the world the way that I do.